The wind howls through the fjords. The waves crash against a longship, its warriors gripping their axes, whispering silent prayers. However, these are not prayers for mercy. They are calls to the gods, to Odin for wisdom, to Thor for strength, and to Freya for safe passage into the next life. The gods of the Norse were not distant, nor were they merciful. They did not sit on golden thrones, removed from the struggles of men. Instead, they walked among mortals, shaped their fates, and demanded sacrifice. But the question remains, who were these gods? Were they protectors or were they forces of chaos that men had to appease? And why does their mythology still hold power today, more than 1,000 years after the last Viking longship set sail? In this video, we will uncover the forgotten truths of Norse religion. We will meet Odin, the relentless seeker of wisdom, Thor, the hammer-wielding protector, and Loki, the trickster whose deception led to the doom of the gods. But the gods were only one part of this story. We will also explore the dark magic of Seiðr, the blood-soaked rituals of sacrifice, and the terrifying prophecy of Ragnarok. Stay with me until the end, because these myths did not die with the Vikings. They still shape our world today in ways you might not expect. Every religion has a story of how the world began, a tale that explains where we come from, how the universe was shaped, and why things are the way they are. However, the Norse creation story is unlike any other. It is a saga of fire and ice, of giants and gods, of chaos and order battling for dominance. And now we will tell that story, the birth of the Norse cosmos. Before gods, before men, before time itself, there was nothing. However, this was not the emptiness of silence. It was something far more dangerous. It was chaos. To the north there was Niflheim, a realm of endless frost and bitter cold. However, to the south lay Muspelheim, a land of raging fire where flames danced like living creatures. And between them, a vast void known as Ginnungagap, a place where nothing existed. And yet, it was here, in the darkness between fire and ice, that the world was born. In Muspelheim, flames roared. Sparks shot into the black abyss, but they found nothing to burn. At the same time, in Niflheim, great rivers of ice stretched into the void, creeping ever closer to the flames. For countless ages, fire and ice reached toward each other, never touching, never mingling. However, fate had already decided. The moment would come. Then, at last, it happened. Fire met ice, and the frost began to melt. Drops of water pooled in the abyss, and from them life began. But this was no ordinary life. From the melting ice a great being emerged, the first of all creatures. His name was Ymir. Ymir was no god, nor was he a man. He was a Jotun, a primordial giant, vast and terrible. However, he was also alone. There was nothing but darkness, and so he slept. But as he slept, something unnatural happened. From the sweat of his body, new life emerged. His flesh gave birth to more giants, creatures as massive and powerful as he was. The frost giants had come into the world. But Ymir was not the only being to emerge from the ice. As the frost continued to melt, something else was revealed, a massive cow, Audhumla. Unlike Ymir, she was gentle. However, she had a purpose. She nourished the newborn giants with her milk, giving them strength. But where did she come from, and why was she here? While Ymir and the giants multiplied, Audhumla licked the salty ice, slowly revealing something hidden beneath. However, this was no beast, nor was it another monster. It was a man, a figure frozen in the ancient ice. As she continued to lick, the ice fell away, revealing Buri, the first of the gods. Buri was strong, wise, and powerful, but he was alone. However, fate would not allow him to remain so. In time, he had a son, Bor, and Bor in turn took a wife, a Jotun named Bestla. From their union came 3 brothers who would change the world forever. Their names were Odin, Vili, and Ve. These three gods looked upon the chaotic world ruled by Ymir and the frost giants. They saw the darkness, the cold, and the endless conflict. However, they also saw opportunity. They did not fear the giants, nor did they accept their rule. Instead, they chose war. Odin, Vili, and Ve knew that to create a world of order, the old chaos had to be destroyed. However, Ymir was no ordinary enemy. He was the first being, the father of all giants, and his power was beyond measure. But the gods did not hesitate. They attacked. The battle was unlike any other. The gods struck Ymir with all their might, but the giant fought back, shaking the very fabric of reality. However, Odin and his brothers did not falter. Blow after blow, they pushed him back until finally Ymir fell. The moment his body hit the void, a great flood erupted from his wounds. His blood rushed across Ginnungagap, drowning nearly all the giants. Only two survived, Bergelmir and his wife, who fled to the farthest reaches of the world. However, for Odin and his brothers, the war was over. And now it was time to build. The gods stood over Ymir's fallen body. However, they did not mourn him. Instead, they saw in him the materials for something new, something greater. And so they began to shape the world itself. His flesh became the land, the rolling hills, the vast plains, and the mighty mountains. His blood became the seas and rivers, flowing endlessly across the world. His bones became the towering peaks, jagged and unbreakable. His skull became the sky, a vast dome stretching over all things. His brain became the clouds, drifting aimlessly above. His hair became the forests, growing wild and untamed. But there was still darkness. The world had form, but it lacked light. However, the gods had an answer for that as well. From Muspelheim, they captured embers and set them in the sky, creating the sun and the moon. They placed stars above, pinning them in place to guide travelers. However, even light needed balance. So they created night to chase the day, ensuring that neither would rule forever. The world was vast, but it was empty. There were no men, no women, no creatures to walk the lands the gods had created. However, Odin and his brothers would change that too. On the shores of the sea, they found two trees, an ash and an elm. But they were not merely trees. They had potential, and so the gods took them and gave them life. Odin breathed into them, giving them spirit and consciousness. Vili gifted them reason and intelligence. Ve bestowed upon them speech, hearing, and sight. And with that, the first humans were born. Their names were Ask and Embla, and they were the ancestors of all mankind. The gods built a home for humans, Midgard, the world of men, a realm protected from giants by a great wall made from Ymir's eyebrows. However, Midgard was not alone. It was only one of the 9 worlds connected by the great world tree, Yggdrasil. And at the center of it all, the gods ruled from Asgard, watching over their creation. The world had been shaped. The gods had risen to power. However, even in creation, destruction was woven into the fabric of reality. The blood of giants still ran through the world, and fate had already begun to spin its threads. The gods may have won the battle against chaos, but their war was far from over. Because one day, the giants would return. The fire of Muspelheim would rise again. The cycle of creation and destruction would repeat. And the gods, no matter how mighty, would face their end in Ragnarok. But was the world truly doomed? Or was it simply preparing for something new? The world had been shaped from the corpse of Ymir. The sky stretched high, held up by the skull of the first giant. The sun and moon chased each other across the heavens, and Midgard, the realm of men, had been set in place. However, the gods were not alone in this new world. There were 2 great families of deities, each with their own powers, desires, and destinies, the Aesir and the Vanir. But where did they come from, and why were they destined to clash? Odin stood atop his throne in Asgard, his single eye scanning the world below. However, he was not the only god in his mighty hall. Around him stood warriors, tricksters, and rulers, gods who shaped the fate of men and prepared for the battles of the future. The Aesir were the first and mightiest of the Norse gods. They were warriors, rulers, and architects of fate. However, their power came at a price. They were gods of conflict, always preparing for war, always shaping the world to their will. Odin, the All-Father, was their leader, wise, cunning, and always seeking knowledge to protect his realm. Thor, his son, was the strongest of them all, wielding Mjolnir to defend Asgard against giants and chaos. Tyr, the god of justice, was fearless, so fearless that he placed his hand in the jaws of the wolf Fenrir, knowing full well he would lose it. Loki, however, was different. Though he walked among the Aesir, he was no warrior. He was a trickster, a shapeshifter, a god of mischief. However, his presence among them would prove to be both a blessing and a curse. The Aesir built Asgard, their great stronghold, a realm of golden halls and towering fortresses. However, they were not the only divine beings in the world. Far to the west, another family of gods ruled, and they were very different. Beyond the walls of Asgard, across the vast seas, lay a realm of fertility, beauty, and magic. It was not a place of war, but of wisdom, not a fortress of stone, but a land of endless forests, rivers, and golden fields. This was Vanaheim, home of the Vanir, the gods of nature, prosperity, and sorcery. Unlike the warlike Aesir, the Vanir were gods of fertility, wealth, and magic. They were deeply connected to the natural world, their powers tied to the land, the sea, and the cycles of life and death. However, they were not weak. Their magic was ancient, and their knowledge was vast. Njord, the god of the sea, ruled over the winds and the waves, bringing fortune to sailors and merchants. Freya, his daughter, was a goddess of love and beauty, but also of war and sorcery. She practiced Seiðr, the powerful magic of fate, and she chose half of the fallen warriors to join her in her hall. Freya, her twin brother, was the god of peace, prosperity, and the harvest. However, he also wielded a mighty sword, one that could fight on its own, striking down his enemies without fail. The Vanir did not seek war. However, they had power equal to the Aesir, and the two families of gods could not ignore each other forever. The gods were supposed to be wise. They were supposed to be rulers of the world. However, even they could not escape the pull of war. The Aesir and the Vanir, two great divine families, would not remain at peace. And soon the first war of the gods began. The reason for the war is shrouded in myth, but one story tells of Gullveig, a Vanir sorceress who came to Asgard. She was beautiful and powerful, and she spoke of gold, wealth, and magic beyond the Aesir's understanding. However, the Aesir did not trust her. They saw her magic as dangerous, her knowledge as a threat, and so they tried to destroy her. 3 times they burned her. 3 times she was reborn from the flames. This act enraged the Vanir. They saw it as an attack, an insult, an act of war, and so the two families clashed. The Aesir fought with weapons and brute strength. Thor's hammer split mountains, and Odin's spear never missed its mark. However, the Vanir fought with magic and cunning, twisting fate itself to turn the battle in their favour. The war raged for years. However, neither side could truly defeat the other, and so, weary of bloodshed, the gods made a truce. However, peace would come at a price. To seal the truce, the Aesir and the Vanir agreed to exchange hostages, each sending their finest gods to live among the other. The Vanir sent Njord, Freya, and Freyr to Asgard, where they became honoured members of the Aesir's court. In return, the Aesir sent Hoenir and Mimir to live among the Vanir. However, this exchange did not go as planned. Hoenir, though strong and handsome, was indecisive. He could not make decisions without Mimir's counsel. The Vanir saw this as an insult, believing they had been tricked. However, they could not act in open war again. Instead, they took Mimir and beheaded him, sending his severed head back to Odin. However, Odin did not mourn. He preserved Mimir's head with magic, keeping his wisdom alive. Though the war had ended, tensions still lingered. The Aesir and Vanir had merged into a single pantheon, but their differences remained. The Aesir ruled with power and steel. The Vanir ruled with wisdom and magic. However, together they would shape the fate of gods and men alike. The world had changed. The gods had fought, but they had also learned. And now the Aesir and the Vanir stood together, ruling the 9 realms in uneasy harmony. However, fate had not forgotten their war, and one day their conflicts would return to haunt them, because Ragnarok was coming, and the gods, no matter how mighty, would one day face their doom. For the Vikings, the gods weren't distant, untouchable beings. They were part of everyday life, present in every battle, every storm, and every harvest. Honoring them wasn't just a matter of belief, it required action. Rituals, offerings, and sacred ceremonies weren't optional. They were essential to securing the gods' favor in a world where survival was never guaranteed. The Norse didn't just pray to their deities, they bargained, sacrificed, and celebrated with them. So, how did the Vikings practice their faith? In Norse religion, devotion was measured in deeds, not just words. To gain the favor of the gods, offerings had to be made. The most common, blood sacrifices. Horses, pigs, and goats were slaughtered, their life force given up in exchange for blessings. Good harvests, victory in battle, protection from the harsh elements. But the stakes could be even higher. Sometimes the gods demand more. In moments of crisis, famine, war, or disaster, human lives were the ultimate offering. Rare but significant, these sacrifices were acts of desperation, a final plea for divine intervention. One of the most famous examples was King Domalde of Sweden, who was sacrificed by his own people to end a devastating famine. A brutal decision, but in the Viking mind, necessary to restore balance. But not all offerings were soaked in blood. Some were treasures, swords, jewelry, even entire ships, thrown into rivers and bogs as gifts to the gods. These weren't just material sacrifices, they were displays of loyalty, a sign that the worshippers were willing to part with their greatest possessions to show devotion. In return, they hoped for fortune, strength, or a safe passage through life's many dangers. And then there were the blots, grand feasts where the Vikings shared food and drink with the gods. The meat of sacrificed animals was cooked and eaten, their blood sprinkled on temples, homes, and even the worshippers themselves. These rituals weren't just about appeasing the divine. They were celebrations, bringing communities together in a bond of faith and survival. But the Vikings didn't only seek the gods through blood and offerings. Some sought answers in the spirit world. Seiðr, an ancient and mystical form of Norse magic, was their key to prophecy, healing, and even manipulating fate itself. Those who mastered it held incredible power, but that power came at a cost. Seiðr was often performed by women known as vulvas, powerful seeresses who could see beyond the present and into the future. Their rituals were mesmerizing and strange. Sitting high on a sacred platform, surrounded by chanting followers, the vulva would enter a trance, crossing the boundary between worlds. Through her visions, she could reveal a warrior's fate, guide a chieftain's decisions, or foretell disaster before it struck. Neil Price, a leading expert on Viking sorcery, describes Seiðr as not just fortune-telling, but a way of shaping reality itself. The vulva didn't just predict the future, she wove it, much like the Norns, the 3 powerful beings who controlled the threads of fate. And fate, word, as the Norse called it, was inescapable. While no one could change their destiny, they could prepare for it, and Seiðr was a tool to do exactly that. But Seiðr was dangerous, especially for men. Magic in Viking society was seen as feminine, tied to the weaving of fate and the unseen forces of the cosmos. Even Odin, the most powerful of gods, faced scorn for practicing it. It was said that his mastery of Seiðr made him effeminate in the eyes of the other gods, revealing the tension between power and taboo in Norse belief. Those who walked this path did so knowing they risked both immense power and social condemnation. Faith wasn't just practiced, it was rooted in the very land itself. The Vikings built sacred spaces to commune with the gods, and while some were towering temples, others were places where nature itself held divine power. One of the most famous was the temple at Upokra in Sweden, a grand structure where worshippers gathered for sacrifices, feasts, and sacred rituals. Archaeologists have unearthed weapons, golden amulets, and even human remains from its depths. Clear evidence that this was no ordinary building, but a gateway between the human and divine worlds. But not all places of worship were built by human hands. The Vikings saw power in the land itself: sacred groves, mighty waterfalls, towering mountains. These natural sites were believed to be home to spirits and gods, and rituals held there were just as powerful as those performed in any temple. At Trelleborg in Denmark, a sacrificial bog has revealed offerings of weapons, jewelry, and even human remains given up to ensure the gods' favour. And then there were the Hofs, small but significant temples where Viking communities gathered for religious ceremonies. These halls were decorated with carvings of gods and mythical beasts, their walls steeped in the smoke of offerings and the echoes of prayers. More than places of worship, they were centers of social and spiritual life, binding communities together in shared devotion. But perhaps the most striking religious structures were the Viking burial mounds and ship graves. These were more than just tombs, they were vessels to the afterlife. The Vikings believed that a warrior's journey didn't end in death. To reach Valhalla or Freyja's Sessrumnir, they needed their weapons, their wealth, and in some cases, even their ships. Entire vessels were buried with the dead, meant to carry them across the final sea into the halls of the gods. The Vikings lived in a world shaped by gods, spirits, and fate, and their religious practices reflected that deep connection. Every offering, every sacrifice, every ritual was a way of bridging the gap between mortal and divine, of securing survival in an uncertain world. But to truly understand the Norse, we must go even deeper, beyond their rituals and temples, into the very way they saw the universe itself. Next, we explore the Viking worldview, their understanding of fate, the cosmos, and what it truly meant to exist in a world where destiny was already written. To the Vikings, the world wasn't just a collection of scattered events. It was part of a vast, interconnected cosmos where gods, men, and spirits all played their roles. At the center of it all stood Yggdrasil, the mighty world tree, binding the realms of existence together. This wasn't just a symbol, it was the backbone of the Norse worldview, a living force that held the fabric of reality itself. But even this great tree wasn't immune to decay. From its highest branches to its deepest roots, Yggdrasil mirrored the universe's greatest truth. All things are destined to grow, wither, and eventually fall. Yggdrasil was more than just a tree. It was the axis of all existence, a living bridge connecting every world in the Norse cosmos. Its branches stretched into the heavens, supporting Asgard, the realm of the gods, while its roots reached into the dark unknown, binding the past, present, and future together. But like the world it sustained, Yggdrasil was in constant turmoil, forces of creation and destruction battling beneath its bark. Deep within its roots lay three sacred wells, each holding the power to shape destiny. There was the Well of Urd, where the Norns, three mysterious goddesses, wove the threads of fate. the Well of Mimir, where Odin sacrificed his eye for wisdom, seeing the past, present, and future all at once, and the Well of Vergelmir, the boiling cauldron from which all rivers flowed, a reminder that life itself was born from chaos. But Yggdrasil was no peaceful guardian. It was a battleground of forces that sought to preserve or corrupt it. At its base, the dragon Nidhogg gnawed ceaselessly at its roots, a force of decay that threatened the very foundation of the world. High in its branches, a great eagle watched over the realms, while the squirrel Ratatoska darted between them, carrying insults and schemes between the eagle and the dragon. This constant struggle symbolized the Vikings' own view of life, a cycle of strength and decline, order and chaos, each force shaping the world in unseen ways. But Yggdrasil was also a pathway between the nine worlds, each with its own role in the cosmic balance. Asgard, the fortress of the Aesir gods, stood as a beacon of power and order. Midgard, the world of humans, lay between the forces of civilization and chaos. Jotunheim, the land of giants, loomed as a realm of primal, untamed nature, forever clashing with Asgard. There was Alfheim, home of the Light Elves, and Svartalfheim, where dark elves and dwarves forged the gods' greatest treasures. And then there was Hel, the cold, mist-shrouded realm of the dead, where those who did not die in battle found their eternal rest. Every realm was connected, and every action in Midgard could send ripples through the rest. The Vikings understood that they were not separate from this grand design. They were part of it, their choices shaping not just their own fate, but the fate of the universe itself. But the Norse cosmos wasn't built to last forever. Even Yggdrasil, mighty as it was, would one day tremble. The Vikings believed that the end of the world was not a question of if, but when. This was Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, the final battle that would bring destruction and renewal in equal measure. The first signs of Ragnarok were terrifying. Fimbulwinter, an unending cold, would descend upon Midgard, starving and breaking humanity. Brothers would turn on brothers, and the sacred bonds of kinship would shatter. The sky would darken as the monstrous wolf Fenrir, loosed from his chains, devoured the sun. The Midgard serpent, Jormungandr, would rise from the ocean, its venom poisoning the very air and water, and Loki, the cunning trickster, would march at the head of an army of giants and the dead, ready to strike against the gods themselves. Then the final battle would begin on the plains of Vigrid. Odin the Allfather would lead the gods into war, but even he could not escape fate. He would be swallowed whole by Fenrir. Thor, mightiest of warriors, would slay Jormungandr, only to stagger 9 steps before collapsing, dead from its venom. The sky would burn, the seas would rise, and the world as the Vikings knew it would be reduced to ash and ruin. But here's where the story takes a turn. Ragnarok wasn't just the end. It was also a beginning. From the destruction, a new world would rise, green and fertile. 2 human survivors, Lif and Lifthrasir, would emerge to repopulate Midgard, and a handful of gods, including Odin's sons, would remain to rebuild Asgard. In this cycle of destruction and renewal, the Vikings saw a reflection of their own lives, battle, death, and the hope that something greater would rise from the ruins. If even the gods could not escape fate, what hope did mortals have? The Vikings believed that destiny, or wyrd, was inevitable, woven into the fabric of reality by the Norns, the 3 weavers of fate who lived beneath Yggdrasil. Every warrior, every king, every thrall had a thread in this great tapestry, their end already decided. But this didn't mean they were powerless. For the Norse, accepting fate wasn't about surrender. It was about facing it with courage and honor. A warrior could not escape death, but he could choose how he met it. He could cower and fade into obscurity, or he could die with sword in hand, ensuring his name would be remembered in the songs of the Skalds. This idea that one's actions could shape how fate unfolded was the essence of Viking belief. And fate wasn't just cosmic, it was deeply personal. Beyond the larger web of destiny, there was Urlog, an individual's personal fate, shaped by their choices and the deeds of their ancestors. A Viking's actions in life determined how they would be remembered, and that memory, in many ways, was the closest thing to immortality. The balance between destiny and free will was a challenge, but also a comfort. The Vikings knew they could not control their fate, but they could control how they met it, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The Norse saw their universe as a vast, intricate web, where gods and mortals were bound by fate and the cycles of time. But what lay beyond this life? How did the Vikings prepare for the final journey into the afterlife? In the next chapter, we step into the world of Viking funerary customs, where ships carried souls across the sea, where fire and earth shaped a warrior's final resting place, and where the echoes of the dead still lingered in the living world. For the Vikings, death wasn't an end. It was a passage, a journey to another realm. Their funerary customs weren't just about mourning, they were rituals of transition, ensuring that the dead entered the afterlife with honor, status, and the tools they needed for what came next. From grand ship burials that sent warriors and chieftains sailing into eternity, to humble cremations that released souls into the smoke and sky, every burial told a story. And through these stories, we glimpse a society that saw life and death as two halves of the same great saga. The Vikings had no single way of burying their dead. Instead, their funerary practices were shaped by status, wealth, and tradition. The most legendary of these, the ship burial. For the Norse, a ship was more than a vessel. It was a symbol of power, freedom, and the journey to the next world. To be buried in a ship was the highest honor, ensuring that the deceased would travel into the afterlife in grandeur. One of the most spectacular examples is the Oseberg ship burial, discovered in Norway in 1904. Inside, archaeologists uncovered the remains of two women, surrounded by an astonishing wealth of grave goods, ornate sledges, carved carts, and even textiles that had survived the passage of time. The ship itself was beautifully decorated, its prow curling like a serpent, as if ready to carry its occupants beyond the veil of the living. This was not just a burial, it was a statement. These women had been powerful, respected, and their journey was meant to reflect their status even in death. But not all Vikings could be buried in ships. Many were cremated, their bodies burned in great pyres that lit up the night sky. To the Norse, fire was a purifier, a way to free the soul from the body and send it on its way. The ashes were sometimes placed in urns or scattered in sacred places, each flame a final farewell to the mortal world. Others were buried in great earthen mounds, towering over the landscape as eternal monuments to their legacy. These burial mounds were often placed on hilltops or near waterways, serving as both tombs and landmarks. Some were accompanied by runestones, engraved with inscriptions that spoke of the deceased's deeds and warned travelers to respect the spirits within. And then there were the burials that defied simple explanation. Bodies partially burned before being buried, graves layered with intricate symbols and amulets, and sites where the dead seemed to have been positioned with purpose, perhaps for a ritual only the Vikings truly understood. These hybrid burials reveal a culture where tradition and spiritual belief were deeply intertwined, creating funerary rites as complex as the afterlife they believed in. What a Viking was buried with told as much about them as how they were buried. Grave goods weren't just relics, they were extensions of the person, ensuring they carried their status, power, and identity into the next life. And in a society where reputation was everything, what you took with you mattered. For warriors, the grave was a battleground outfitted for eternity. Swords, axes, and shields were laid beside them, their blades often bent or broken, not from battle, but as part of the burial ritual, ensuring they would serve their owner in the next world. Some were buried with their horses, their trusted companions in life and now in death. Others had entire ships interred with them, as if ready to set sail into the unknown. Women, too, were buried with objects that spoke of their roles and status. Weaving tools, jewelry, and household items were common, marking their craftsmanship and influence within the family. In some graves, women were buried with keys, powerful symbols of their authority as the keepers of the household. These weren't just objects, they were statements of who these women had been and what they had meant to their world. But some grave goods carried deeper meaning. Small amulets shaped like Thor's hammer Mjolnir were found in many burials, likely placed there for protection in the afterlife. Others contained gaming pieces, combs, and even mirrors, items that made the dead seem almost alive, as if they had simply stepped into another existence. Some graves even held exotic treasures, Arabic coins, Byzantine silks, and silver from lands as far away as the Middle East, a testament to the Vikings' vast trade networks and their belief that wealth could be carried beyond the grave. But the most striking burials included more than just people. Horses, dogs, and even birds were laid to rest beside their owners, believed to serve as guides and companions in the afterlife. Some Viking warriors were buried with their entire crews, their ships laden with provisions, ready to continue their journeys beyond death. Yet, not all graves spoke of honor. Some burials contained bodies that had been bound or weighed down with heavy stones, as if to prevent them from rising again. These so-called revenant burials suggest a fear that the dead might not always stay dead. The Vikings believed that some spirits, restless or vengeful, could return, and precautions had to be taken to keep them in their graves. The funerary customs of the Vikings were as rich and complex as their lives. Every burial, every offering, every ritual was a reflection of their beliefs about power, fate, and the journey beyond death. But their legacy didn't end with the last Viking funeral. Their myths, their gods, and their worldview have endured, shaping our modern understanding of courage, destiny, and honor. The Viking Age was a time of warriors, explorers, and legends. Their gods, their beliefs, and their way of life shaped history, and their legacy still echoes today. But this is just one part of their incredible story. If you want to dive even deeper into the rise of the Vikings, check out our other videos in the Storm from the North series, Storm from the North, Rise of the Vikings, Part 1 and Part 2. Don't miss the full saga of how these seafaring warriors changed the world. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter in history. Until next time, keep exploring the past.